Morning, everyone. This is Stacey Cram from Namachi. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to give everyone just 1 minute and then we'll get started. We just see a couple people joining right now. Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Stacey Cram. I'm the Policy Director at Namachi, and I am pleased to be welcoming everyone to today's webinar, which is part of Open Gov Week and the Justice for All campaign's Year of Justice webinar series. It's Thursday, March 14th, and today we've come together to discuss the role of justice in the Open Government Partnership, or OGP. Founded in 2011, OGP provides a platform for civil society to work with their governments to draft and implement policy commitments on their priority advocacy issues. Today we'll find out how access to justice commitments have expanded within OGP, hear from civil society on how they have used OGP to advance legal empowerment, and we'll learn how you can participate in and leverage the upcoming OGP Summit and the new OGP National Action Plans to advance justice and legal empowerment in your country. Today we have 140 webinar registrants joining us from 42 countries. We are joined by a number of really great panelists alongside all of you attendees. We have Peter Chapman from the Open Society Foundation, Open Society's Justice Initiative, Sandra Elena from the Government of Argentina, we have Johnny from the Tifa Foundation in Indonesia, and Natalia from the Soros Foundation Moldova, and Tonu from the Open Government Partnership. My colleagues Coco, Madeline are on hand to help field your questions. So welcome everyone. I'd just like to briefly introduce you to the Global Legal Empowerment Network, who is hosting the webinar platform. The network is a growing community of more than 17,000 organizations and 6,000 individuals from around the world who are working to advance justice. Members include human rights activists and grassroots organizers, advocates, lawyers, and community paralegals, researchers, policymakers, and public servants. Through the network, these practitioners are able to come together to collaborate and learn from each other, both online and through in-person events. They share ideas, challenges, best practices, and resources. And last year, members of this network launched Justice for All campaign, which is calling on world leaders to increase financing and protections for grassroots justice defenders. OGP is one mechanism that our community is using to drive forward reforms on these key issues. So before we get too far into today's proceedings, I just have some brief housekeeping. So firstly, take note that this event is being recorded, and we will share the full recording and highlights later on the community website. I also want to make sure that everyone's able to hear well and you're able to use our webinar system. So you'll see a question panel where you can type in questions and communicate with us. And there's also a button that looks like a hand for raising your hand to get our attention. So feel free to use those and we'll be able to communicate with you. Please type any questions you have for the panelists as we move along, and we're going to collect them and do our best to answer every one of them at the end. And time permitting, we will also open the floor if you want to unmute yourself at the end to ask questions directly to the presenters. So now I'm going to hand over to Peter Chapman, who'll be facilitating today's discussion. Pete, over to you.
Great. Thanks a lot, Stacey. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm quite excited to be joining this webinar. I think it's a very timely webinar in the heart of Open Gov Week to talk about how access to justice and legal empowerment are being strengthened through the Open Government Partnership. As Stacey described, the OGP fundamentally is the platform that enables civil society and government at a national level to come together and advance key open government priorities. And we have a great lineup of presenters today who bring real practical experience using OGP mechanisms to advance open justice and access to justice. So in terms of speaking order, we'll start with Sandra Elena, who is perhaps best suited to give a global picture of how access to justice is treated in the OGP. She's now written several papers and coordinated several papers analyzing open government and justice commitments and trends over the last few years. And just to signal a highlight, we're seeing exciting momentum, which will transition into the presentations from Dani Ardianto from Indonesia and Natalia from Moldova, who will both describe their experience using the 2018 National Action Plan process to advance access to justice and delivering concrete commitments between governments and civil society around a future direction of justice in those countries. And then we'll turn to Tonu, who I think can situate access to justice and open government partnerships broader strategy and talk about some of the opportunities moving forward. As Stacy mentioned, I worked for the Open Society Justice Initiative, and we've been exploring the open government partnership as a concrete platform to really deepen government and civil society relationships, programming, coordination, collaboration to realize legal empowerment. So what we hope to get out of today, as Stacy said, is really help folks think about ways to strategize about the 2019 National Action Plan process, the global summit taking place in May in Ottawa, Canada, as an opportunity to really mobilize and move government and civil society commitments, which I hope might be something Dani and Natalia could touch on, reflecting a little bit on their attendance at the Tbilisi summit last year. And then talk about, once a commitment gets in a national action plan, what does that mean around implementation? I mean, we're early in the 2018 cycle, but I think ultimately implementation of the plans is obviously a key measure. And so with that, I think I'll turn it over to the presenters in order to leave some time for questions and discussion. And so I'd ask Sandra Elena to kick us off, and I'd hope we could stick with the 7-minute presentation guidelines to really enable an opportunity for this community to engage on these issues. So Sandra Elena, over to you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for the organizers to give us this opportunity to share our research and our work on open justice. Just a little brief presentation of myself. I am the coordinator of the Open Justice Program at the Ministry of Justice of Argentina, and I am also a researcher for a long time now on justice-related issues, open justice and integrity in the judiciary. What I would like to present today is some results or findings of my research that we published right before the Tbilisi summit last year, along with Peter and Mr. Kana. So I would like to share some findings on how countries are using the OGP, which my colleagues described very well, as a platform to enhance and to promote justice-related commitments. First of all, I need to say that justice was not one of the first subject matters that was important or strengthened within the OGP. So it was kind of marginal. There were only a few commitments on justice at the beginning. And in my case, I am involved with the OGP since 2012. And since then, we are trying to deepen and broaden the scope for the use of OGP as a platform for justice-related commitments. Being said this, I would like to show some examples of how countries are using OGP to promote open justice. You can see in the slides a research that we conducted last year, and you can find all the findings in this piece of research. So I would like just briefly comment on some of them. So if we can go to the next slide, we can see that over time, more governments are using OGP as a platform to enhance commitments on justice. Currently, there are 3,851 commitments included in OGP, and we selected those that are related to law enforcement, justice, the law in general. So from this total amount of commitments, we found that 128 commitments are related to justice matters. If we go to the next slide, you can see that in 2015, the commitments on justice on OGP represents 1.8% of total commitments. And if you conduct the same analysis in 2018, you can see that this grew up, and we have now 3.3% of commitments that are related to justice. This is an increase, but still, if you compare to other areas, it's still a low number. So we talked about different people that are promoting the use of justice commitment within OGP and see how we can promote the increased use of OGP. And first, we decided to update this research. In the next graph, you can see how the figure, the quantity of amount of justice-related commitments flows over time. And you see that there is kind of increase in the use of OGP for this. So, as I said, it is still low. We need to promote the use among governments, and this is what we are trying to do in the different meetings that we have in the summit, in the regional meetings. But still, there is a lot of work to do. Now I would like to talk, if we go to the next slide, to what are these justice commitments about. So at the beginning, they were mostly focused on transparency, access to judicial information, and open data in general for the justice sector. This was the initial trend, and I think it went along with the general trend. The first commitments within OGP were more related to transparency and access to information. So this was also the case in the justice sector. But there are two topics that are spreading quickly among the commitments related to justice, which are access to justice and justice for women. So I could say that if we consider the three topics, access to justice, open data in the judiciaries, and justice for women, these are the main topics that are now present if we analyze the commitments. So next, we have some examples of new countries that are committing on justice. For example, Macedonia, that are producing commitments on access to justice, the Kyrgyz Republic about open data, Paraguay that proposed 7 commitments on justice. We also have analyzed how the different regions use OGP, and the Americas seems to be the region that are making the more of OGP to promote justice commitments. Now, with my other hat, so this was as a researcher conducting this analysis on how this works within OGP, but now I would like to just in 1 minute, let me check how much time I have, to tell you how the government of Argentina is using OGP to promote open justice. So in our second and third action plan, we decided to use the OGP system to promote our initiative of an open data portal. We designed and developed the first open data portal for the Argentine Republic, and now we have a unique tool in the region in which we collected open data related to the justice system for the Ministry of Justice and in a coalition within 52 judicial institutions of Argentina. So we have a broad open data portal in which you can find the information about our judicial system, actually the judicial sector at large. So as I'm running out of time, I would like to say that we need to make a lot of, from the next summit that is going to take place in May in Ottawa, we need to strengthen the work with other governments of different regions on how to use the platform to produce more good, sound, and very important commitments on justice, and also how we can promote this in the different regional meetings that we have. I think I will stop here because I already have my 7 minutes, and then I will be open to questions and answers. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sandra Elena. I think that's a really helpful overview, particularly the trend analysis of those three areas where it seems justice commitments are clustering around open data, access to justice, and justice for women, as well as the example of the Argentine portal. And I do hope we can talk a little bit about your suggestion around Ottawa and organizations that may be coming to advance access to justice there. Now, I think, however, we'll turn to Donnie to further dive into an example of how access to justice, how open justice can be advanced through a national action plan. So, Donnie, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Pete. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this event. So, I will start with my presentation on the Open Government Indonesia Action Plan on Access to Justice. And we base our action plan on some issues or problems. First one is we see that the constitutional rights of citizens in Indonesia, especially on the equality before the law and access to justice for the poor, is quite inadequate. So we already have our legal aid law in 2011. And after 7 years of implementation, we're still facing some other challenges like the limited budget for national legal aid and also limited legal aid coverage because we have very broad countries. So there's also uneven distribution of legal aid organization, the organizations that provide legal aids. And we also have challenge on the quality of legal aid services. And the other one, on the demand side, we see that the awareness of the poor community are still low, and even they don't realize that they have eligibility to access legal aid from the legal aid provider. So probably we can go to the third slides. So our action plan is first is to increase national, especially at this point, this central government legal aid budget, and because it's not covered yet all of the needs of legal aid in Indonesia, so we also need to have more local legal aid regulations that will also allocate budget from the local government for legal aid. And the other plan is we see that those two plans should also be complemented by trying to encourage and establish more legal aid providers, including the lawyers, the paralegals, especially in the remote areas and areas where have high poverty levels. And we also need to expand the demand side by raising awareness about the existence of legal aid services. So overall, our plan is trying to solving some public problems, which are to have more and more people that are aware and have access to legal aid programs, and also could have good legal assistance services. On the other hand, we also need to empower community, strengthening the community legal awareness and also their capacity, especially the poor people. So in technical levels, we have 4 commitments specifically. So the number of local regulation on legal aid in district level, we want it to be increased from around 60 now to 100 out of 515 districts that we have. This is commitment for the next 2 years. And the second commitment is to have the local regulation also, but in provincial level. So we want it to be increased from 13 provinces into 21 provinces out of 34 provinces that we have. So it should be around 75% of them. And the third one is to have the number of legal services that given to the people that need legal aids from 15,000. We usually for the last 2 years we have around 15,000 cases to 20,000 cases. And for the quality of legal aids, we had some beneficiaries of legal aid satisfaction index. We want it to be increased to 50%. So this is our commitments, and basically the 2 stakeholders that have the mandates to do these commitments are from the government, from the Ministry of Law and Human Rights, and from the civil society. We have Indonesian Legal Aid Foundations. This specific organization also have their branches. So Legal Aid Organization in Indonesia have around 15 branches across the country, and also will be supported by another local legal aid organization that we have now around 528. I think my time is also out now, so I will give it back to Pete. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Donnie, for that summary. I think it's an interesting example of where you have sort of an institutional framework in existence. Here you're citing, legislation passed 7 years ago, but an opportunity for OGP to be a catalyst for government and civil society to come together and use these tools to advance a broader open government agenda. So thanks for that. Natalia, we'll turn it over to you now to hear a little bit about the National Action Planning process in Moldova.
Thank you, Pete. Can you hear me well?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. Hi, everyone. So my name is Natalia Cambulan. I work at the Justice and Human Rights Department of Soros Foundation Moldova. Can you please start the presentation? Thank you. Next slide, please. So the government of Moldova joined the OGP process in April 2000. 12. So far it had developed 3 national action plans, and as you can see, none of the above action plan had any specific objectives related to access to justice. Although we had a few commitments, I think 2 commitments related to judicial in general, but none of the action plan had any relevance to legal empowerment topic or paralegal network. So when we started to work on the new OGP process, we had to have a conversation with the steering committee. Next slide, please. Yes, we had to start the conversation with the National Steering Committee, with the Ministry of Justice, National Legal Aid Council, to see what is the link between OGP and legal empowerment. How are they connected? Next slide, please. So what we did, we had face-to-face meetings, we organized public events. The steering committee organized an online survey to collect some feedback from civil society to develop the national action plan, and we also participated and provided our written recommendations. We had also some negotiations with the national institution. Moldova is one of the states, probably some of you are familiar with the situation when the first 2 drafts have inserted the commitment that you proposed, but unfortunately the third draft, in the third draft or the fourth draft, the commitment is missing. So we were in the situation where we had to constantly monitor the decision-making process and to communicate always with them. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, some of the communication and negotiation looked like that because a few key people didn't quite understood what is the connection between OGP and legal empowerment, because so far everything related to OGP was connected to e-transformation. Next slide, please. But at the end, we managed to establish, to have a common understanding of how legal empowerment can be used as a tool to promote transparency, accountability, and to encourage people to be more actively engaged in open government process, and everything at the end went smoothly. Next slide, please. So at the moment we have the National Action Plan was approved by government's decision at the end of November 2018. It will refer to the period 2019-2020. It is our first national action plan that has a specific action that is related to access to justice and the extension of paralegal network. Why it is important and why probably we had some troubles in the negotiation process when the national action plan was developed is the fact that in Moldova, the paralegal network is entirely financially supported by the National Legal Aid Council. And having a specific action that will make the government to take commitment that it will increase the network is directly connected to additional financial burden, the responsibility of the state. So we thought that might be one of the issues. Next slide, please. So after the National Action Plan was approved, in Moldova, again, having a strategic document is a big win, but it doesn't imply automatically that the action written in the document are going to be implemented by default. So again, we need to be in constant monitoring and communication with the decision makers. Next, please. And how did we use the OGP to advance legal empowerment in Moldova so far? So even though we have some troubles with the government, having a commitment at the government level anyway is a very good commitment. It's a key, it's an opportunity that we can use to advance our agenda. Also having the government say that legal empowerment, access to justice is a priority and it's written in the National Action Plan is a way to say that the topic stays on the agenda, because our interest is to maintain the focus on this topic as much time as possible. And we can use this opportunity to push forward other advocacy claims related to legal empowerment. In our case, like finalizing the institutionalization process of paralegals profession, because we always can invoke the National Action Plan as one of the documents that stipulates directly that access to justice is a priority for the government. And another interesting thing I think was that the National Action Plan was used in the dialogue with the Minister of Finance to increase National Legal Aid Council's 2019 budget to extend the paralegals network with 10 additional persons. Thank you. And please let me know if you have any questions related to Moldova's experience.
Great. Thank you very much, Natalia. I think it was really helpful starting with describing your strategy of really how to build that commitment around OGP and legal empowerment. You know, Sandra spoke of how there's growing commitment, but that certainly doesn't mean that in all cases governments and other civil society colleagues are going to see the links between a justice agenda and an open government agenda. And I also appreciated your comment on monitoring implementation and sort of, I think I'll look forward to checking back in a year or two as implementation has moved on, and we can maybe reconvene this webinar to sort of assess some of those impacts. So now for our final speaker before we get into discussion, I'll turn it over to Tonu from the Open Government Partnership, who can provide the perspective from OGP's side and describe a little bit about some of the planning for this year and possible opportunities.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks everyone for joining us for this conversation. So I'd actually like to pick up where Natalia left off. Like Pete, I also greatly appreciated your comment, Natalia, on the links between the access to justice agenda or the justice agenda writ large and open government agenda. And as we heard from Sandra Elena, it's been a lot of work from civil society partners and government partners on this call to make those links happen. But what we're seeing more and more in OGP is that there is a growing recognition of linking justice to various conversations we're having, whether it's anti-corruption, inclusive participation, gender, community rights. So linking justice as a cross-cutting theme rather than a standalone or siloed issue has been a critical point of learning for us as a partnership. And to see the growing commitments happen in OGP is a result of making those connections more concrete. The second thing that where I would like to start my presentation is really recognizing where those links lie between the conversations that Donnie and Natalia spoke. So conversations happening within national OGP action planning processes to a field building policy level conversation to a lot of global conversations that all of us are a part of, whether it's around the SDGs or and the high level political forum or other global conferences and conversations that continue to happen. I think one of the things that OGP and what we hope to do, working closely with several of you, is to connect the dots between these multiple levels, because we think it's very valuable to connect global conversations to country action. And that's something that we see action plans being a critical instrument to help deliver on. So at the country level, and what do I mean at the country level? Donnie and Natalia's stories and many more commitment stories that we see in OGP are looking at tackling existing challenges related to not just the justice sector, but other sectors that have a justice angle on it. And identifying those challenges and then identifying commitments that can address those challenges is where OGP's value add is. The other thing that we're seeing is, and where OGP I think can really join this justice coalition and support efforts, is coordinating between these different sectors. Often we see conversations around access to justice or the justice agenda involving only justice ministries, whereas we think it is important to really socialize this issue across ministries, across civil society organizations, across communities. And because the OGP process at the country level requires that kind of coordination between countries, agencies and different civil society, we think that's an important conversation to keep going at the national level. I want to move on to the field building conversation now and policy level. I think conversations like this, where we really focus on really what are some of the commitments, what are some policies that countries can look at, is a question we get a lot. Saying that, look, I'm in a country and I'm developing a national action plan. What are some examples of legal aid commitments that other countries have worked on? What are some good examples of open data in the justice sector? How do we make the justice sector more transparent? How do we make information around justice institutions more transparent? And so keeping that learning across policy areas at very concrete levels is something that I think is important to have, and something that OGP is keen on supporting more of in the community. And at the global level, as I said, I think there are a lot of conversations around access to justice, given that it is the year of justice, as the Global Legal Empowerment Network has called it, especially because of the focus on SDG 16 this year at the High Level Political Forum. It's an important opportunity to show collective action and progress on implementation. And that's again where OGP comes in. We really hope that we can bring together countries who have been making justice commitments to share concrete ways that this has worked, but also where the failures and challenges have been, so that the conversations at these global conferences are not just lost in tweets or communiques, but are actually connected to real world conversations and policies. The other thing that I think is really important to see, and where we as OGP are keen on supporting, is the importance of coalition building. I think all of us in working across civil society organizations and advocacy issues have seen that coalition building really helps get an issue on the policy table. But I think we equally realize that that's important to look at learning around implementation. And that's the other key aspect that we want to see is at Tbilisi, we brought together ministers, justice ministers from different countries to think through what concrete actions could be taken. And we've been trying to do this at different global fora. So that's where we see the global connection come in much more strongly. Next slide, please. So I won't spend a lot of time on commitment areas, because that's something Sandra and others have done. But what I do want to focus on is the summit that Pete had spoken about earlier on in the webinar. So the OGP Global Summit is a place where civil society leaders, government leaders, private sector, academia all come together. And that's a place where we see a lot of conversations around what's happening at country level, how can we learn from each other? And justice is an important piece of the agenda. So the theme of the summit is gender and inclusion. And we know that justice is an important piece of this conversation. The government of Argentina, the justice ministry there, is keen on hosting a side event as well that'll focus exclusively on conversations of where different justice ministries are working on it, where different civil society organizations are working on it, and what we can do between now, HLPF, and going forward. So we really hope that Ottawa could be a milestone in the series of events we've seen this year on justice, and can provide some concrete actions that we can then showcase at HLPF. Next slide, please. The other opportunity that I want to talk about, next slide, please, is the 50 action plans that are being developed this year. So as, again, Pete had mentioned earlier on the call, 50 OGP members are developing action plans, which means that government and civil society will sit together and decide priorities on that will go into concrete commitments. And that's a great opportunity, as we've heard from Natalia and Johnny's story, to getting concrete action. The other thing that we've seen in different OGP action plan processes is the judiciary is engaged in several of them. For example, in Liberia, we've seen the judiciary come in and be part of commitments, and civil society as well. And we think that these action plans, that in some countries, the process has already begun, and we can share the list around of countries that are developing action plans so you can see if your country is on that list. And our suggestion would be to join the conversation and see what from either the SDGs agenda or the justice agenda in your country you can link to the OGP action plan process. The other piece I think that would be very helpful for this community to think about is what kind of actions a justice coalition could take moving on from here. Can we ask for concrete commitments to be made at HLPF that are then taken into subsequent OGP action plans? Are there ways to involve other communities, women's groups, grassroots communities, land rights groups, and others who are not involved in justice conversations so far. So I'll stop there and we can talk a little bit more about these opportunities in the question and answer session. Thanks so much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tonu. I think that really sets us up well for helpful discussion. I think I really appreciate your point around OGP as a platform for coordination. I think that came through in all three of the presentations. You know, getting beyond a justice sector to engage broader actors. And I think it's helpful to reflect a little bit on the Ottawa event and whether that can be a real milestone on justice and how we can build that into the agenda, as well as you know, harness some of the learning that's taken place, including on this call, so that network members, others on the webinar in these 50 countries that are developing new action plans can take inspiration, can take lessons from these experiences. So I learned a lot through the presentations, and I really appreciate each of you sticking to time. So we have about 20 minutes for discussion. So we're getting some questions coming in, both broad sort of questions to all participants, as well as targeted ones. And so I thought I might just start with a few of those, and then I'm online just via phone, so I might ask Coco to handle whether folks want to come in and actually ask questions themselves. But just to start with some targeted as well as broad questions. There's a question for you, Sandra Elena, around sort of the integrated information management system that you all have, and what role OGP played in bringing together different judicial data. If you could just describe that a little bit. And then similarly for Donnie and Natalia, I think there are a couple questions that sort of lump together for your presentations around both the process as well as the content of OGP and access to justice and legal empowerment, including whether the private sector has been involved, including around financing, whether the traditional system or customary or informal system has been incorporated into these OGP discussions, or is it largely a platform for government in civil society? So I think maybe we can start there on those focused conversations, and then broaden out a little bit, Tono, to some of the conversations sort of looking forward. So Sandra Elena, Donnie, and Natalia, I'd ask you each if you're interested in responding.
Sure. When our current Minister of Justice, Minister Garavano, took office 3 years ago, we realized that we didn't have a uniform and reliable just judicial data system. So we decided to create from scratch a new system, and we analyzed all, you know, Argentina is a federal country, so we have the national level, but also 24 provinces. So we have actually 25 different judiciaries in the country. So we needed we studied other big federal countries, and we decided to use a system that is a mix from what is going on in Canada and in India in terms of how collecting data. So now we have an integrated system. So we collect open data and disaggregated data from the provinces, and we combine them with no aggregation, just in a raw format in our portal. So this is a step forward, a very important step forward, because now we still have some many problems with data. The registration of data is still a problem, but at least we know that what we have now is at least what we have in the records. Maybe it's not a picture of the situation, but it has not been manipulated or subject to many mistakes as it was in the past. So now we have this integrated system. And how OGP, we included this in our second and our third action plan. And how this helped, I can say it helped a lot. because this was an innovation in justice. And as many of you may know, the justice sector is it's very resistant to innovation, to include everything that is new. So having this as a commitment of Argentina in an international organization gave us a lot of power to make this reform. The reform was very slow. It was not as I was expecting at the beginning, because the judiciaries were resistant. They have their doubts, of course. But we decided that we needed a national coalition. We are part of the Ministry of Justice, and the judiciaries are autonomous. So we created consensus. We signed an agreement, a voluntary agreement, with 52 judicial institutions in the country. And being part of OGP gave us a lot of leverage, in the sense of we are not doing this because it's just an idea of the Ministry of Justice, but it is a priority of Argentina, and it is such a priority that we decided to include this in a national commitment, in an action plan, in an international organization. So this is how being part of OGP strengthened a lot our position and gave us more power to negotiate and to convince the local organizations to be part of this project.
Great. Thanks very much. That's a really exciting and I think very concrete example. So thank you, Sandra Elena. Donnie, over to you with questions around stakeholder involvement, private sector, informal systems, etc.
Yeah, thank you. The process itself is like another country also do. We have also conversation between the Ministry of Law and Human Rights and with the civil society, and then at the time civil society proposed some action plan on justice for OGP, and after some discussions, and then we decide to pick one, because the other proposals are also around access to justice index and also around the data on justice, but we decide to pick one, legal aid provisions. And because we see that it's increased community awareness and then also community participation and opportunities to in decision-making process. Because in our legal aid system, it's also covered administrative cases, like when some government decision or government policies are have a negative impact for the people. We have opportunity to use legal aid as our tools to challenge that government policies or decisions. So that also gives some opportunity for people to, decision-making process.
Great. Thanks, Donnie. Natalia, do you have any reflections?
Well, in Moldova's case, we did have a formal format of collaboration. There was actually an open call. The government selected 8 members, 4 from the government and 4 from civil society, that formed the National Steering Committee. So the entire process, I can say so, was coordinated from the chancellor, which is a state institution. And the private sector, unfortunately, wasn't involved, only civil society, and not in an extent as we expected it to be involved, if I can say so. Although they did organize a few events and they did conducted this online survey. As I said in my presentation, we had this surprise at some point during the process that one of the draft, in one of the draft was missing the commitment that we agree on, and everyone said that it's important to have it in the document. So that was our experience.
Great, thank you. I think one other sort of broad question, I think, Tonu, starting with you, is that you sort of mentioned this opportunity for collective action and engagement around the Sustainable Development Goals within this sort of emerging justice community. And I'm just curious if there are examples from other OGP sectors that you might point to in terms of models or inspiration. And I'm also curious what the other panelists see as the opportunity. And I think that's sort of one question. I think very much related to it, we also have several questions on the discussion board around, how we, either as government agencies, civil society organizations, sort of whatever perspective we're coming from, how do we engage with this OGP process without sort of taking it over, without being the one that simply drafts the commitments without necessarily seeking or achieving sort of buy-in from other sectors? How do we catalyze? How do we ensure, in Natalia's case, things don't drop off the agenda? But how do we do that in a way that ensures that everybody's coming on the journey? So maybe Tonu, I would ask maybe to start with you.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's a great question, and something that's relevant not just to the access to justice community, as you rightly pointed out, but even to others, is how do we keep a cross-sector conversation going? I think we've seen this happen on issues like gender, for instance. Or an issue like open contracting, or an issue like beneficial ownership, or rather transparency in who owns anonymous companies. So these are all issues that have grown in prominence in OGP over the last few years, like access to justice. And there are some common things that we see across these areas. I think one is identifying a few strong government champions and working with them. So I think Sandra Elena's case is great because Argentina has really been championing this issue for a long time, access to justice, and we identify others who are working with NAMATI, OSJI, Pathfinders, other governments who are very passionate about this agenda, especially across regions, and really identifying a way to bring them together as a group that can not only showcase what they're doing, but initiate ideas for future action. I think the second is it can't be just done by governments alone. And for every successful coalition of governments that we've seen, it's been backed by a very strongly coordinated body of civil society who provides technical expertise when needed, the right amount of advocacy pushes and coordination, including with national level civil society partners, and linking them to global conversations. I think that's the other piece we've seen that has really worked, like an issue on anti-corruption. Making sure that on things like SDGs, on things like international anti-corruption conferences, global forums like G20 and the G7, really connecting those dots with their government and government ministries, and then bringing it back to OGP has been very, very successful. So I think that's something to draw on. And lastly, before I turn over to others, I think the important thing that we've seen, and to answer your question on the SDGs angle, is governments like to go and Sandra Elena and other governments on the call. I would love to hear their take on this as well. But our members, OGP members, love to showcase concrete progress on issues. And at the high-level political forum, I think it's important that we as a community support efforts to showcase something concrete. So I think highlighting past efforts, but also ensuring that conversations that have been happening now are captured in OGP action plans, so that in the 2-year cycle, there is constant monitoring and delivery, and there are conversations around this at the SDGs, at the high-level political forum and SDG 16 conversations. So let me stop there, and I can add depending on what others think.
Thanks so much, Tonu. I think that sort of mutually reinforcing sort of agendas and using OGP in that way is really strategic. Donnie, Natalia, Sandra Elena, do you have reflections on these questions?
Yes, building up on what Tonu said, I think that on top of using OGP for proposing commitments, we need to create and to strengthen a formal mechanism for promoting justice. And I have in mind, same as Tonu mentioned, the open contracting, for example, that was an issue that was very important for OGP at the beginning, and now that it is a standing alone organization working very closely with OGP. So some kind of arrangement similar to that could work. What I can say is that the government of Argentina is also part of a task force on justice that are part of the Pathfinders. So we are already in a coalition along with other governments, the government of the Netherlands and the government of Sierra Leone. The government of Canada and Switzerland are also cooperating on this, and with many civil society organizations like NAMATI, like the Elders, and many others. So we do now have some practice on how to build this global coalition for strengthening justice. And we are having conversations, and the high-level panel that we have at Tbilisi was maybe the kickoff, the formal kickoff of this. And we are promoting the creation of this coalition and formalizing this coalition linked with OGP. And the last thing that I would like to say is that Argentina is going to have the next presidency of OGP, and among the topics, the key issues that each country, when it has the presidency, promotes, it will be justice. So we will have an OGP focus on justice, and I think that promoting this coalition that would be built around the experience and the organizations and governments that we have in the task force could be great and a good way of moving forward.
Great, Sandra Elena, thank you so much. That's really exciting to hear in terms of next steps and the next in the year ahead. Donnie or Natalia, and I note that Donnie is in fact a task force member as well on the Pathfinders on Justice.
Yeah.
Well, in our case, I totally agree that OGP can help us to promote a more formal coalition of justice group. We do plan to use this platform to persuade the Ministry of Justice to organize, to establish an interinstitutional working group, in our case, to make sure that they will revise and improve the legal framework that regulates access to justice and paralegals in the Republic of Moldova. So we just have to wait until the new government will be established. We had recently elections. But that was also one step that we were thinking are doing in close future, in near future.
Great, thanks, Natalia. Donnie, any comments?
Yes, it is. We also have a plan actually in a regional, especially in ASEAN level in Southeast Asia, to have some access to justice consultation forum, where we can invite all of the ASEAN member, and we can also share. We want to share our commitments in OGP, and hopefully all of the other ASEAN countries will learn and can have a discussion there. And we can also share about another commitments, because not only on OGP but also on the SDGs, and share our progress, especially on goals 16 of SDGs. So we're gonna do it both on both track, OGPs on justice and also goal 16 of SDGs.
That's fantastic, Donnie. Thanks for that update. So looking at the time, we've reached the hour, and before I turn it back over to Stacy to formally close, I might just offer a quick reflection or two. I mean, I think I've been struck by the consistency of all the presenters of how OGP has been used as a way to elevate issues and connect agendas at a national level, and as Tonu describes as well, to make connections between international pieces. And I think secondly, this webinar, having tracked these conversations for the last few years, definitely represents growing momentum from several commitments a number of years ago to several attendees at previous global summits focused on justice. We've seen, as Stacey described, 145 registrants for this webinar, dozens of justice advocates in Tbilisi, and now Sandra's really helpful and exciting announcement that justice will be a core priority for Argentina's chair of the Open Government Partnership. So as we look towards Ottawa and this question of collective action, I do hope this platform and the Legal Empowerment Network can continue to be a place for this community to come together and discuss how to continue to strengthen access to justice through the Open Government Partnership. So thanks very much to Namati, to all of you for joining, and the Global Legal Empowerment Network for hosting. It's really great to have this space to connect and share. And thanks very much, Stacey. Back over to you.
Thanks, Pete, and thank you, everyone. I have been so delighted by this conversation. I think, echoing just what Pete said, it does feel like there's momentum and progress, which is always heartening. So I just want to thank everyone, and yes, we will continue to have this conversation on the community forum. So if you haven't had a chance to do so yet, be sure to join the network. You can see the conversation if you're not a member, but obviously take part if you are, and head to the Justice for All website, Justice for All 2030 as well, where you'll be able to find more information and resources and discussions on OGP. We will be in touch by email with a reminder as to where you can find all of this information, a link to the presentations, and how you can get involved in OGP. We'll send you information on where you can sign up. So thanks for everyone for joining. Thank you for the excellent questions. And yes, we are definitely going to keep this conversation going. And it's the year of justice. We're going to be great. So thanks, everyone, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a nice day or evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.